Yep, that's a planetary in your base, and that must be Mass Ravens. So, these are the signatures of Ketroc, a master level Terran who since Wings of Liberty has played off meta. The StarCraft community first became aware of him in 2011, where he surprised audiences with this unusual concept of the planetary fortress rush.
Jeff, that blue block is moving. Oh my f***.
He showed up again in 2013, this time showing us effective use of Mass Ravens, units which are normally not used in such high numbers. Since then, despite low APM and constantly being supply blocked, he's been able to win games against players well above his level, using creativity and his different mindset towards the game. So in a game where it seems like not playing the accepted builds of the day will lead to nothing but losses, I decided to sit down with Ketroc and find out how to play just like him. All right, and I'm here with the blue block moving master himself, Ketroc. Welcome to the show. How are you? How you doing?
Doing well. Bringing back memories with that reference.
Well, that's what we're here to talk about. We're really kind of here to dig in and kind of your history and your playstyle. You are a unique player by trait, I think by trait. So how would you, though? I know how I would describe you. Unique as words that, like, sort of meta breaking is how I describe you, but how would you describe yourself as a player?
I guess what it comes down to is I usually really want to win by value. And there's many different strategies in StarCraft too, but they all involve winning by tempo. I always thought, what if I just trade efficiently and then my opponent runs out of resources and then I win by value? So that's usually what's been taking me down the path of all my weird strategies from there on.
You've been around since Wings of Liberty, maybe even beta, if I'm guessing. And you got sort of debuted by the meme from when Cheese Fails, like episode 4, and the blue block moving. Is that kind of when you decided you're going to be this unique kind of player? Or did you start way before that and you're like, I'm going to be this unique player, screw all that?
Probably way before that. I mean, even back to Brood War and Warcraft 3, I always had tried to make the nuttiest strategies work and get really high on the ladder with it. Mostly in StarCraft 2, where I became a more higher end player, I guess. But when I first started, I was like Silver League, and I just had this idea of, well, if I go command center first, but I make it a planetary fortress, then I'm being economic, but I'm also being defensive at the same time, right? So that's definitely going to work, even though it doesn't make much sense at all once you know the game. But I kind of stuck with that, and that kind of led to, okay, well, what does having a planetary give me? Okay, it allows me to tech up fast, safely. It allows me to get 4 gas geysers quickly. So even though that build kind of fell apart playing standard bio, I decided, I can tech fast and have lots of gas. Let me try Mass Ravens, see how that works. And, from that point forward, all of a sudden, a lot of my weird strategies came out. The main one being the Mass Raven.
You design the strategies from scratch? Like, you kind of, like, I know you play off meta, but like, do you walk me through the process of you designing a strategy from scratch? Because obviously you're not going to find these as off a spawning tool.
It involves losing a lot is the main contributor, I would say. But you kind of just start with a goal. Like, I want to get to 8 ravens as fast as I can. And then you make a build that works for that. And then you throw it on the ladder and you find out, okay, what am I dying to? So maybe I die to Bailing Bust. So then I got to decide, okay, so I need to make an adjustment so I survive Bailing Bust, or I need to scout for that. And as you develop this over and over, you start being able to handle all the different meta builds and you crisp up your own build. And then all of a sudden you got this thing that reaches the goals that you want to get to. I've always been much more interested in the strategy portion of RTS games. Like, I remember In Control once said that there's no point playing the Heart of the Swarm like when it first comes out, because no one's figured out the meta yet. You got to wait a couple months before you can actually dive into it. And I'm like, I'm the exact opposite of that. Like, the first 2 months of an expansion is the most exciting time for me. That's when I get to figure things out before other people do, and there's no meta and there's no standard, and you can't just watch the GSL and copy something. But I can come up with things that will like crush old Wings of Liberty builds and have a lot of fun that way.
And so, does that make your life harder than maybe the standard player to have to like come up with strategies from scratch? Like, obviously you've been able to achieve a level of prominence without the level of having the same APM as some of the top players, or even having the same kind of control. But does that make you have to be on the back foot to have to learn your strategies from the beginning, or how does that affect you?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a lot more work to develop a build from scratch, especially when sometimes a build takes many hours and tons of games to get good, only to realize that your opponent can figure it out in one game, watch the replay once and say, oh, this is what I do to beat it, and then
Right.
snap, like it crushes the build and kind of makes it obsolete, compared to watching a pro player and saying, okay, he's doing this, so I'll do that as well. And not only is that a lot easier, but it's usually a lot better too, because there's a reason builds are meta, is because they're really strong. I think there's this really cool way that the game balances itself around that, though. Like, the better your build is, the more standard it is, and the more standard a build is, the more your opponents know how to beat it. So my builds may be weaker than standard builds, but a lot of my opponents haven't put like a single thought into like how to deal with it or how to beat it. And even if I face the same opponent on the ladder maybe 20-30 times, he may do everything wrong. So it's kind of weird where, because of that, I'm able to beat GM players because maybe they're only GM because of their mechanics. But at the same time, I might lose to platinum players just because they can figure it out and know how to beat me. And even though they don't have the mechanics, they can kind of solve the build that way.
Do you feel your style is limiting in the sense that you won't be able to win a tournament, or, you know, or do you feel that it's just a matter of time and practice?
I don't think the builds I use are strong per se.
Hmm.
So I think the more I play an opponent, the more likely I am to lose. Because if the build I use is actually strong in every single way, then the builds I use would become the meta, right? Like Mass Raven has always been pretty terrible. Even back when people complained about Ravens, no one went Mass Raven because it was terrible. You know, because if it was good, you'd see pro players use it. Maybe when the anti-armor missile was 30 damage, we saw Mario use it a little bit, but
Right.
For the most part, not very good. Like, I'm not going to win tournaments, as you say, but I don't think my build is not keeping me from winning tournaments. I'm just not that skilled of a player. So it's more of a ladder sort of strategy. The fun for me is in developing unique strategies, you know, making my opponents rage, which is always a sign that I'm doing the right thing, and and gathering some unique victories.
Can you tell me about a time when you beat a player far beyond your level using your strategies?
Probably the most prominent player I beat was MVP Tails back in the day.
Oh,
But
wow.
he was on really bad ping. I could tell by his micro. So maybe a better example was I played a GM Zerd player in a tournament called Baldwin. His APM was probably at least triple mine. Since he is so much higher than me in MMR, we've never met each other on the ladder, and he didn't know
Right.
who I was, and he's never seen my strategy before. And just all the stuff that works well for my strategy against Zerg, I was able to pull off against him just because he hadn't seen it before. Yeah, I was able to crush him in game 1, and then game 2 he was able to overwhelm me, so I couldn't kind of get set into my build. And then by game 3, even though he'd seen my build twice, he wasn't able to make enough adjustments, and I got a big lead, was able to push it to victory.
Now, is that something you find happens a lot? Like, if you play a particular opponent, maybe if you've played any tournaments or cups or anything like that your advantage is the fact that people are just not expecting what you're doing? And if so, like, how do you capitalize on that?
I think for anyone in my MMR range, I think I have a much higher chance of beating a top level player than any of them do. But I also think I have a much higher chance of losing
Good.
to
Yeah.
someone that they would beat 100% of the time.
Do you play in tournaments? Like, do you enter tournaments once in a while to test where you lie in them, like to just sort of measure yourself against them, or do you avoid them?
I like participating in them because it gives me that one opportunity to maybe play a big name player. You know, if you get lucky or make it through a couple rounds, then maybe you get to play like a Scarlet or play a Korean pro yeah, that always interests me because I don't get to do that on the ladder as a 4,500 MMR player. But I never know when they're on. I don't know good sources to see the tournament, so I very rarely play in them. But when I do catch one, I'll play in it for sure.
What outside of StarCraft helps you contribute to the creativity, to your creativity of creating strategies or even thinking of unorthodox ways of playing? Is there anything outside of StarCraft that helps contribute to that? Like maybe poker or some other sport or creative outlet?
I played poker professionally for many years, actually. It was my career.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I used to go on like the 2+2 forums and talk to other pros, but I used to always only do it to figure out what, kind of what the meta of poker was at the time. Like figure out what other people are doing and what their thought process is, and then try to get a level ahead of that myself. So I never wanted to learn from the best players to emulate them. I wanted to learn what other people were doing so I could, take a step ahead of that. It's the same in StarCraft too. Like I always try to keep aware of what the strong meta builds are, because I need to be able to handle all those different builds.
There's a level of which like you conditioned. You're conditioned to operate in a certain way. Does that ever happen to you in any way? Like, like I imagine no one really maybe plays your kind of strategies, but does anyone ever maybe message you and say, because of you, I have learned how to deal with planetary fortresses lifting up and dropping in my base?
I definitely have people emulate my style.
Oh, okay.
In lower levels, like Platinum League players and Diamond League players. Actually, the first player to ever beat Alpha Star was just a Diamond League scrub, but he was playing Mass Ravens, and Alpha Star.
I saw that on Reddit.
No idea how to beat that.
I saw that on Reddit.
Yeah,
I remember I saw that on Reddit. That's actually really cool. Wow, you're inspiring a new generation of Mass Raven users. Okay, so that's actually brings up an interesting question: is that do you feel that because your style has proven, at least shown, that it's possible to beat high-level players without maybe high APM, can get supply block? I'm assuming you still don't maybe use hotkeys to the same extent as some players. What does that say about the game to other players? Like, what do you think it says to like the game as a whole in terms of playing at a high level?
It's definitely a strategy that would lend itself to being stronger for certain players who may not be as mechanically fast. I think there's aspects of my strategy that makes the game way more difficult than playing meta, but certainly not how fast you can click or can you multitask 5 armies in 5 different places. These are things that aren't that important. But for instance, with playing Mass Raven, you can never actually lose your Ravens. You can't run them in somewhere and just lose a whole bunch of them, because then you instantly lose the game. So you have to have this, like, you gotta be babysitting them at all times and have unit retention and really be smart about the way you engage. So there are other skills that are involved, but certainly high APM is not one of them.
And so that's what I'm really curious about. Is it possible, you may not have or don't work on certain things like hotkeys or APM, but if a player uses your kind of strategy and they maybe have these things in addition, maybe higher APM or hotkeys or both, would they be able to maybe take that to another level? Because I've seen some of your ways you've played your strategy, some really creative ways. And is that maybe the crux of it? Or is there a level of which, doesn't matter the APM, just being creative could be the solution to winning a BlizzCon, WCS, or whatever have you? Do you believe that? Or do you maybe seen any evidence that maybe that supports something like that?
A mechanically strong player using my strategy will certainly be leaps and bounds better than myself. Strong mechanics can make this build much, much stronger. For example, when I play Zerg, I often dump my minerals into Hellbats, and I just kind of duck walk them across the map into different bases because they're a pretty good A-move unit that you don't have to micro. But if you had the ability to babysit your Ravens and multitask your Hellbats, then you could instead keep them as Hellions, dart in and out, do some blue flame harass on mineral lines. You get a lot more value. You can mineral dump into like marine drops. Specifically to pro level, I don't know.
Do you consider yourself to be more creative than an average player?
I think I put more importance in being creative than an average player. If I were to copy like a GSL Terran's build, in my head I almost feel like that's cheating. I'm like, for me, because it's like, this isn't my build. I didn't figure this out. Why am I doing this? I'm just copying someone else. I come from the way back days of gaming where gaming didn't really take place on the internet. And when you're playing a strategy game like this, and then you had like LAN parties back then where everyone brings their computers to one place, and it's like everyone has their own meta. Like this guy and his friends figured out how to play the game. Me and my brothers figured out how to play the game, and whoever figured it out the best would win that competition. Nowadays, once anything new is figured out, like instantly it's spread all over the internet and everyone knows it. So watching a game like Kiwi Kaki versus Stefano back in the day, there was a time where the mothership was considered completely useless. It was like a known fact by all pros that the mothership was terrible, and Kiwi Kaki beat the best foreign Zerg player almost exclusively with the mothership, and it was one of the most amazing games ever. And then a month later it looked like a standard PvZ, because then every Protoss player was using the mothership in that way.
Are there other players that inspire you in terms of like their creativity? I
don't watch a lot of pro SC2 anymore. I used to always prefer like mech players just to see what ideas they would come up with. So Gumiho, Reality, if I could catch a stream, maybe Rough, since there's a mute button, maybe a Velo. Again, just the same context of like copying Mario. I wouldn't want to copy any of their strategies. Maybe I would see Rough do like a ghost opener and make some work out of it. But then I'd see like a tactic he would use, and I'm like, oh, maybe I could apply that in this situation and that would work. Or I once saw BC Cutie do like a joke build on his channel. He was just kind of like memeing on a Bronze to Masters series. But when he was memeing, he did something that was just kind of throwaway to him. But to me, I was like, there's something there. This is like an opener where I can delay the Protoss expansion by a good 3 minutes if I sharpen this up a little bit. I get inspired by other players, I'll say, even though I try not to copy them.
I like that idea of almost another player's junk build is another man's treasure build. It's just this idea of like, oh, someone does this trashy build and they'll do it once and never do it again. And you're just like, this might work. So what would you give in terms of advice to somebody who is aspiring to be like you, to play like you, or even to be more creative like you? What would you give someone in terms of advice?
First thing is ladder anxiety. You gotta not care about losing. In fact, losing is where you learn. If I play 10 games in a row and win all 10, my build doesn't change at all, because there's nothing that I've learned in that, but very little that I can learn from winning. So the losses is where I make the adjustments and kind of where I find the gaps and where can I like be greedy, like cheat, like get to somewhere really quick where I'm not supposed to be able to get there that quick, or seal up a hole that I happen to have, maybe slow things down a little bit. So what I like to do is when I lose a match is to jump into the replay and try to go back to the point in the game where I lost, which is not the end of the game, but the point that kind of the turning point where like if I didn't, like this is the point where there's nothing else I can do, I've already lost the game. And what could I do to avoid that point in the game? If I get all ins, for instance, I go back to the point where, okay, I would need to have gotten, like, what do I need to survive this all in? What units do I need? How far back do I have to go to decide when I need those units? Maybe I needed an extra tank to survive. So let's go back. I need 3 minutes to get that tank out. So let's go back 3 minutes. Okay, let's stop the replay here. Let's see, is there any indication that this is the build he's doing and I'm going to need the tank? And maybe there is indication just on the information he's giving me, but maybe there isn't. I need to go scout him. Or maybe I just build the tank no matter what, and then I find a use for that tank in other scenarios as well.
So a lot of like analysis
here, I guess. I kind of
no.
track your question, but for me, it's a lot about replay analysis. Like it's always cool to like come up with an idea and just play around with it and see if it works. But to really refine it and to get it working at a higher level, it takes all that refinement of knowing what the meta builds are, knowing how to identify them, knowing how to handle each specific scenario. And that's what may make some of these situations that look like crazy creative for you is actually something I've actually pre-planned.
Right. Right.
I'm opening CC first and I get cannon rushed. I haven't even got a barrack started, right? And then I go float a command center to my opponent's base. Well, that's actually pre-planned because I know from that position, I got a bunch of minerals that I'm not going to be able to convert into brains at the time. So I just got to delay his cannon rush, and then I can convert that minerals into my win condition, which is building a planetary in my opponent's base.
I love how that transitions. Essentially, that is the win condition. Is the planetary in the base, which makes sense. You've pre-planned it and you've kind of studied it. Do you take notes? Like, how do you iterate? Do you take notes? Do you track it? How do you keep track of all this?
Sometimes I take notes when I'm creating a build. A lot of it's around gas timing, because when you really want to make something super efficient, you want to make sure that you get just the right amount of gas. If you don't have enough gas, then you're not going to be able to get those tech structures in time. If you have an extra 100 gas, that meant you could have had an extra 100 minerals and gotten the build going quicker. So in creating the build, I'll often make notes just to make it crisp. For the refinements, I think where a lot of work is done, it's mostly just mental notes. And even if you don't remember something, you'll lose to that situation again, and then you get a refresher. So as long as you're taking a look at your losses and putting some thought process into what to do in those situations.
All right, well, that concludes it. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Ketroc, for being on the show or doing this interview with me. Any last thoughts, words, maybe a line, a shout out?
I'm not sure when this goes live, but check out the ProBots finale when my own bot and 2 others will be battling it out in the top 3. And
it'll definitely be after the robots.
Okay, well, you can check out the VODs on ESChamp. I do stream on Twitch occasionally under name Ketroc. And yeah, thanks a lot, Drek. It was a good time.
Perfect.